I drive this stretch of I-80 twice a year. Same trip, same route, same gas station halfway through Nebraska. I know this station the way you know a rest stop you've used so many times you stop actually seeing it, the layout, where the bathrooms are, which pump is closest to the door. I've stopped there probably a dozen times over 6 years. That's the only reason I noticed the driver at the pump behind me was filling the same tank for 14 minutes. My name is Derek. I'm 29. I'm a software engineer, and I say that not because it matters professionally, but because it means something about how I process things. I look for patterns. I don't assume things are wrong until I've exhausted every reason they might be right. I need you to know that before I tell you the rest of this. The drive is Portland to Chicago, twice a year, Thanksgiving and summer. 18 hours if you push it. I break it up at the same points every time. The station off exit 211 near Kearney is my standard halfway stop. I pull in around 1 a.m. usually, fill up, use the bathroom, get a coffee I won't finish. It's a routine. That night, there were 3 other vehicles at the pumps when I pulled in. 2 big rigs on the far side and a sedan, older, dark blue or dark green, hard to tell under the lights, parked at the pump directly behind mine. The man at that pump was maybe 40, work clothes, heavy jacket, nothing registered as unusual. I pulled up to my pump, ran my card, started filling. I was checking my phone while the tank filled. Text from my mom asking when I'd be there. I responded, put my phone back in my cup holder, and looked up. The man behind me was still filling. I didn't think much of it. Big tank, maybe. I finished at 9 minutes and got my receipt, then walked around to the bathroom on the side of the building. Inside for maybe 3 minutes. Came back around front, got a coffee from the machine by the register, paid, walked back to my car. He was still at the pump. Not unusual on its own. Could have had issues with the card. Could have been filling multiple containers in his truck bed. I couldn't see clearly enough to rule it out, but I noted it. The 2 big rigs were gone now. The lot was empty except for my car and his. I got in my car. I told myself I'd check email for a few minutes before getting back on the road, which was true. I pulled up my phone, and then, without deciding to, I looked up at the pump behind me in the rearview mirror. The man's eyes were not on his pump display. They were on my car, not on me specifically. My windows had fogged slightly from the cold. He couldn't have seen me clearly, but his attention was on my vehicle in a way that had no purpose I could identify. His hand was on the nozzle he hadn't moved. He was just watching my car in the way you watch a door you're waiting for someone to come through. I sat with that for a moment. I ran through explanations. Maybe my car reminded him of someone's. Maybe he was just spaced out and happened to be facing my direction. I've driven long enough to know highway fatigue does strange things to your focus. I started the engine, and the moment I started the engine, I mean within the same 2 seconds, he lifted the nozzle from his tank and began replacing it on the pump. Not rushing, not reacting to anything he could hear. My car was running, he had his engine going too. There was no way he heard mine start over the ambient noise of the station, but the timing was exact. I started my engine, he pulled his nozzle, I pulled out of the station and got back on the highway. I'd been driving for maybe 8 minutes when I looked in my rear view mirror and saw the headlights, 200 yards back, maybe less. I watched them for a full minute before I told myself it meant nothing. That's the thing I remember most clearly about those first few seconds. I didn't immediately dismiss it. Something about the distance was too consistent. Cars don't maintain exact spacing by accident. Spacing that precise requires active adjustment. Lots of cars use that exit. Lots of cars get back on I-80 at 1 a.m. The road between Kearney and the Nebraska-Iowa line is one of the busiest freight corridors in the country. Headlights behind me meant nothing. I sped up to 75. The headlights stayed 200 yards back. I slowed to 60. The headlights slowed too. I watched for 7 miles. The distance never changed. Not because he was drafting, the gap was too large for that. It stayed exactly where it was, like he'd calibrated the gap and was maintaining it. I know how to lose a tail. I know this because I worked briefly as a courier before my tech job, and we used to joke about shaking other drivers in traffic. You take an exit you don't need, circle, get back on. Most drivers don't bother to follow because they have somewhere to be. I took the next exit. The headlights followed. I drove a mile on the county road and took a left into a gas station that was closed for the night. Sat there with my engine off for 2 minutes. No headlights on the county road. I got back on the highway. 12 miles later, the headlights were there again. Same distance, same calibration. I took 2 more exits over the next 20 miles. Each time, I waited. Each time, by the time I got back on the highway, he'd reacquired me. At the 3rd exit, I didn't get back on the highway. I drove until I found an open station, a Flying J truck stop, well lit, busy with freight drivers, and I parked near the entrance. I went inside and stood at the counter. The cashier was a woman in her 50s, and I asked if she'd seen a dark sedan come in after me. She looked out the window and said she hadn't noticed. Then she looked at me for a moment, and she reached under the counter and pulled out a folded sheet of paper and smoothed it on the counter. It was a printed flyer. The quality was like it had been run off a home printer and photocopied a couple of times. There was a photograph, surveillance footage, grainy, taken from above and behind, of a man at a gas pump. Dark jacket, about 40. The image was dark enough that I couldn't confirm it was the same man, but I also couldn't rule it out. At the top of the flyer, 3rd report this week. Same vehicle, different stations. I asked the cashier what he was doing, what the reports were about. She said nobody had been able to determine that. He follows people, he maintains the same distance. He's never approached anyone, not that they know of. He's never been in an altercation at the station. He just follows for a while, and then he doesn't. She said the flyer had been circulated to truck stops and 24-hour stations between Kearney and Des Moines for 4 months. Nobody's caught him yet? I asked. She said no. And then she said, we don't actually know what he's waiting for. I spent the rest of that night parked in the Flying J lot in my car until it was light enough that I felt like the highway was a different road. I finished the drive in the morning. I took a different route home at Thanksgiving. I've looked up that exit on I-80 a dozen times since then. There's nothing in the news. No arrests, no stories, just a stretch of highway that looks like every other stretch of highway, and a gas station that probably still has that flyer under the counter. I don't stop there anymore. I stop earlier now, before dark, when there are other people around and the lot is full. I tell myself it's because I'm older and I plan better. The thing I think about now, the thing I can't shake when I'm driving alone at night, isn't what he wanted. It's the phrase on that flyer, what he's waiting for. Nobody who'd been gathering reports for 4 months could answer that, which means whatever it is, it hadn't happened yet, at least not somewhere they could document it. I know that's not why I changed my route, and I know exactly why I did. The woman in the gray hoodie is not on the security footage. Not because any recording was erased, not because the camera malfunctioned, because she was never there. I watched 22 minutes of footage in that gas station with the cashier standing next to me, and in every single frame, I am the only customer. I want to tell you that before I tell you anything else, because I need you to understand what I'm working with when I try to explain this. I'm 26. I've been a registered nurse for 4 years. I work the night shift, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. at a regional hospital. I've seen what sleep deprivation does to a person. I've seen actual hallucinations, not metaphorical ones. I know the difference between a dissociative episode and ordinary tiredness. I'm telling you this so you understand what it means when I say that I have no framework for what I saw that morning, and I've had a lot of time to look for one. It happened on a Thursday in March. I finished my shift at 7 and pulled into a 24-hour BP station on my usual route home at around 7:30. I stop there a few times a week. It's 4 miles from the hospital, and they carry the breakfast sandwich I like. The lot was almost empty. One car I didn't recognize parked away from the pumps. I pulled up to pump 4, tapped my card, and went inside while my tank was filling. The inside of the store was quiet. The cashier, a man in his 30s I recognized from my usual stops, though I didn't know his name, was at the register doing something on his phone. The store had that early morning stillness, the fluorescent hum you don't notice until you pay attention to it. I was getting a coffee from the machine by the back wall when I noticed the woman. Mid-30s, gray hoodie, hood up. She was in the bread aisle, pushing one of the small hand baskets the store keeps near the entrance. There was a loaf of bread in it and 2 bottles of water. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, just sort of moving along the shelf slowly, the way you do when you're tired and just going through the motions. I didn't think anything of it. I finished making my coffee and moved toward the breakfast sandwiches. When I reached the breakfast sandwich rack, which is in the same aisle as the bread at the far end, the woman was gone. I could see the end of the aisle from where I was standing. She wasn't there. I didn't think about it, reached into the rack, grabbed what I wanted. I moved to the next aisle over to grab a second water for myself. The woman was at the far end of it, walking away, basket in hand. She turned the corner before I got close enough to see her face clearly. That's when something registered. Not alarm, just a small, quiet observation that she'd moved faster than I'd expected. From one aisle to the other, around a corner, before I was close enough to see her face. I was trying to work out the geometry of it, how she'd gotten there that fast from where she'd just been, and I couldn't make it work. I went back up to the front of the store. She wasn't at the register. I looked down the two main aisles from the front of the store. I could see to the back wall. She wasn't visible. I went to the register. The cashier was still on his phone. I put my sandwich and coffee on the counter and turned to look at the store one more time. The woman was standing in line behind me, basket in hand, hood up, one person's length away, not touching, not threatening, not saying anything. Just standing there in a way that was perfectly ordinary in arrangement and wrong in every other way I can't fully articulate. The space between us was correct for a checkout line. The distance, the position, all of it technically unremarkable. But the silence coming from that direction was the wrong kind of quiet. It had weight to it. And her face, what I could see of her face under the hood, was pointed toward me with a quality of attention that I felt before I understood it. I turned back to the register and paid. I took my time. I was aware of her presence the whole time. Not moving, not putting her basket on the counter, just standing. The cashier didn't acknowledge her. Not a glance, not a nod, not the small social acknowledgement you make when there's another person at your counter. He looked through her like she wasn't there. At the time, I told myself he was absorbed in his phone. I picked up my bag and walked out. I walked to my car without running, got in, put my things on the passenger seat, and then I looked back at the store entrance. She was standing at the front of the building, outside the door now. She hadn't gone to the car in the lot. She wasn't moving toward any car. She was standing in front of the door, facing the lot, and she was watching me. Not in a way I can describe as predatory, just watching. The way you stand when you're waiting for something you know is about to happen. I pulled out of the lot. I drove 5 minutes toward home, stopped at a red light, and I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that the cashier hadn't acknowledged her at all. Not once. Not while she was moving through the store, not while she was standing in line, not when she was directly next to his register. So I called the station. I'd looked up the number before for a forgotten receipt once. The cashier answered. I asked if the woman in the gray hoodie had left yet. There was a pause. Then, "What woman? I've been here since 6. You were the only customer who came in today." I told him what I'd seen. He said nothing. I told him I was coming back. He was still at the register when I walked in 5 minutes later. He took me around behind the counter and pulled up the recording on the monitor. The system runs on a 4-camera loop, recorded to a hard drive, standard for small retail. We watched 22 minutes of footage. I arrive, I make coffee, I walk to the sandwiches, I go to the next aisle, I come back to the front, I stand at the register, I leave. In every frame, the store is empty behind me. No woman, no gray hoodie, no basket, no bread, no water bottles, no line. Just me, moving through a store that the camera says I was moving through alone. We watched it twice. The cashier didn't say much. He showed me the other camera angles. There were 4, covering the full interior. All of them showed the same thing. I asked him if there was any way a camera could have been blocked or the angle wrong enough to miss someone. He said no. He said he'd been working there for 3 years and the cameras covered everything. He'd watched me walk in and never seen anyone else. I've been a nurse for 4 years. I know what it looks like when a person is experiencing something that isn't real. I've seen it from the outside many times. I've never experienced it from the inside. I don't have a psychiatric history. I wasn't on medication, wasn't beyond normal, tired for end of shift, hadn't taken anything. The only explanation I've been able to construct is that I was wrong, that I saw something ordinary, and my tired brain built a person around it. The problem with that explanation is this. When I left the register and walked out, I did not imagine turning around. I did not imagine stopping and looking at the door. I know what I saw standing at the front of that building, watching me leave, and the camera covering the exterior entrance shows me walking out, looking back, standing there for 4 seconds before getting in my car. It shows nothing else at the door. I don't stop at that station anymore. I take a different route home now, add about 8 minutes to my commute. My coworkers know I drive home a different way, and when they ask why, I tell them I prefer it. I've worked night shifts for 4 years. I know what I see and what I don't see. I've never told them the real reason. I'm not sure what the real reason actually is. That's what keeps me up on the days when I'm not working nights. Not the woman, but the fact that I still don't have a word for what happened. I've stopped at 1,000 gas stations in my life. I've been playing in touring bands since I was 20, which means I've driven more overnight routes than I can realistically count. I-40, I-70, I-80, the 101, whatever two-lane state highway connects two cities that don't get enough touring acts to justify a real venue. You spend enough nights on those roads and you learn to read a gas station the way you read a room. And you learn which ones are worth stopping for and which ones you get back on the road from as fast as you can. You learn the language of gas station employees at 1 a.m., the ones who are glad to see another person, the ones who wish you'd just pay and leave. You also learn pretty fast when an attendant is trying to help you leave. My name is Marcus. I'm 34. I've been a working musician my whole adult life. Guitar. Mostly touring work, some session stuff when the schedule allows. I just finished a 4-show run through Tennessee and Kentucky and was headed back to Nashville in my van on a Tuesday in November. Somewhere around midnight with an hour left on the drive, I was close enough to home that I should have just pushed through. But I was running on fumes, me and the van both, and I pulled off a county road into a station I'd seen from the highway. The lot was empty. Not a single other vehicle at the pumps or in front of the store. The canopy had one working light and one that pulsed at irregular intervals like it was thinking about giving out. Everything about the station was the kind of ordinary that only registers as strange in retrospect. Small building, single row of pumps, the kind of place that's barely profitable but stays open because it's the only option for 15 miles in any direction. I filled my tank and went inside to pay cash and pick up something to eat. The woman behind the counter was in her early 20s. She had a blonde ponytail and a store logo apron, and the particular brand of tired that comes from being several hours into a late shift with nothing to do. She heard me come in and started moving to the register before I'd made it halfway across the floor. That registered somewhere in the back of my mind. She'd moved to the register fast before I'd gotten anywhere near it. She didn't look up when I set the cash on the counter. She rang me up without asking how much and pushed my change back in a single motion. One clean slide across the counter, exact change, no pause. She looked at the register screen and said, "You're all set, drive safe." There was nothing in those words that was wrong, but the speed was wrong. The efficiency was wrong in the way that very deliberate efficiency is wrong. The kind you deploy when you need someone to take something and go without lingering. I've played enough bars to know the difference between a bartender who's slammed and a bartender who's trying to close out a tab before something happens. I picked up the change and started to turn around. She said, "Take a right when you exit. The left side is closed." I stopped. I looked at the parking lot through the front window. I could see both exits clearly from where I was standing. Right exit went north toward the county road. Left exit went south. The left exit was open. No cones blocking it. No chain across it. No signage of any kind. Just clear asphalt running to the road identical to the right exit. I turned back to the counter. The left exit looks open to me. She was still looking at the register screen. She hadn't moved, hadn't changed her posture. "Take a right," she said again. Same volume, same tone. But something had left it, some quality that made it stop being customer service and start being instruction. I looked at her face. I was trying to read what was happening in it. Her eyes weren't on the register screen anymore. They were on the back of the store, on the door in the far right corner of the room. Staff only on a placard at eye level. The door was closed. There was no light coming from under it. No sound that I could pick up from where I was standing. She was watching that door the way you watch something you aren't sure is staying put. I set my snacks back on the nearest shelf. I kept only the things I'd already paid for. My mind was running through everything at once. The empty lot, the light that had been pulsing when I drove up, how quickly she'd moved to the register, whether I'd heard anything from that back room when I walked in. I hadn't. I was trying to remember if I'd heard anything. I hadn't. But that didn't mean nothing was back there. The absence of sound from a closed door doesn't tell you what's behind it. I said quietly, "You okay?" She said, barely moving her lips. Her voice dropped to something small and contained, the kind of voice you use when you know you're being listened to and you can't stop it. She said, "Right exit. Don't stop until Greenville. Please." I took the right exit. I got on the highway and I drove 40 miles to Greenville without stopping. I watched my mirrors the whole way. The county road behind me was empty when I pulled out of the lot, and it stayed empty as far as I could see. No one followed. I pulled into the lot of a 24-hour Walmart in Greenville and sat in the van with the heat running and tried to organize what had just happened into something I understood. I didn't have enough to understand it yet. In the morning, I pulled up the local news on my phone. The story had gone up at 2 a.m. A robbery. The man had entered the station before dark, around 6 p.m. according to the report, and stayed in the back office. He came out after the last customer cleared the lot and put the attendant in a situation she had no way to exit. He'd made her ring up every customer normally for the next 3 hours while he watched from behind the staff door. She'd had to do it for 3 hours. Whatever I interrupted by walking in, she'd been managing it since 10 o'clock. I called the sheriff's department and gave my statement. The deputy I spoke to said the attendant was at the hospital with injuries from when she'd tried to reach the phone after the man left, but that she was going to make it. He told me she'd written one thing in the additional information section of her intake form. About a customer from around 1 a.m. She'd written 2 words. He listened. I've played shows in a lot of small towns since then. I stop at a lot of gas stations at all hours of the night. I pay attention differently now. Not in a way I can fully describe, not a checklist I run through. It's more that I've started hearing what's underneath what people say, the code inside the ordinary sentence, the message that can't be sent directly because someone else is listening. I've started noticing the attendants who don't meet your eyes, who push change at you in a single motion, who tell you where to exit when there's no reason to. I've driven past a few stations since then and felt something register before I could name it. Some quality in the light, or the empty lot, or the way one car was parked that didn't fit. And I didn't stop. I kept going. I don't know what was behind any of those doors. I'm not going to find out. I don't know what would have happened if I'd taken the left exit. The county road goes both directions, and I don't know what was waiting on the south end of it, or whether it was the exit itself that mattered, or just getting me out of the lot faster. I've thought about calling the sheriff's office again to ask how the case closed, whether they ever identified who the man had been working with, whether the station is still open. I haven't made that call. There's a version of that night where I don't hear what she said, where I take the cash and walk out and go left, the way the road runs, because left and right both get you to the highway. I've driven past 100 stations since that one, and I still think about which exit I'm taking. Some things you leave closed. You take the right exit, you drive until Greenville, and you don't ask what was behind the door. The couple at the next pump said good morning to me. It was 11 o'clock at night. I'm 29. I'm a social worker. I work with families in crisis situations, which means I spend a lot of time paying attention to what people say versus what they mean, and the space between those two things. I've been doing it long enough that I don't always realize I'm doing it. I notice things about how people communicate before I consciously register what I noticed. I'm telling you that because it's relevant to what I'm about to describe and to why I didn't trust my own read on the situation at first. I was driving solo from Kansas City to Denver to visit my sister. I make the trip twice a year, usually. I-70 through Kansas is not a road that gives you a lot to work with. It's long and flat and dark at night, and you drive it because it gets you where you're going, not because of anything it offers along the way. I try to stay awake through it with good podcasts and a full coffee thermos. I'd meant to stop for gas near Salina, but I'd passed the exit without thinking. And by the time I was somewhere between Hayes and Colby, my tank was running low enough that I didn't have the option of waiting for a better exit. I pulled into a small station off a ramp I didn't catch the name of. Low canopy, 2 pump islands, a small lit-up store. The lot had 2 other vehicles in it besides mine, a car parked far from the pumps with nobody visible in it, and a vehicle at the island next to mine. At that second vehicle, there was a couple, mid-40s, both of them. That's the first thing I noticed. They were well-dressed for 11 p.m. in the middle of Kansas. She had a blazer over a blouse, he had a collared shirt, not formal, but the kind of put-together you manage when you've been somewhere that required it. They were both out of the car, standing at their pump, and they'd both noticed me pull in. When I got out and walked to my pump, the woman looked over and smiled and said, "Good morning." Not in a joking way, not the way you say it when you've been driving all night and lost track of time and catch yourself. In a settled, plain, easy way, like it was the appropriate greeting and she was comfortable with it. I said morning back because what else do you say? And I ran my card and started filling. A few seconds went by. The man asked conversationally if it was a long drive. I said, yeah, visiting family. The woman said, I hope you get to see your sister soon. I looked at her. She held my gaze and kept that same comfortable smile. Not a flicker of awareness that she'd said something she couldn't have known. I'd said visiting family. That's all I'd said. Visiting family can mean a dozen different things. I had a sister in Denver, yes, but my cousin lives in Boulder and my aunt lives in Fort Collins. And I hadn't said anything about a sister or about Denver or about where I was headed at all. How did you know it was my sister? I asked. The man said, lucky guess. Cheerful about it. Not embarrassed, not caught, just easy and comfortable the way he'd been since I pulled in. I turned back to my pump. I looked at the numbers on the display. I told myself it was a coincidence. People say things. Visiting family does lean towards siblings sometimes. The way you phrase it, the tone. Maybe she'd picked something up from my body language, my voice. I'm a social worker. I know that reads happen on both sides of a conversation. I was almost done talking myself out of it when the woman leaned toward me across the pump island, still smiling, conversational, light, like she was passing along a useful bit of information. The left rear tire is going to go flat in about 40 miles. You should get it checked here if you can. I stared at her. She nodded once, a small, matter-of-fact nod. Yeah, I know. It's weird. We get that a lot. I didn't check the tire. I finished filling, put the nozzle back, got in my car, and pulled back onto I-70. I drove for 15 minutes, then 20, then 30, with that sentence running in my head and trying to find a container for it. She'd said it like it was normal, like whatever she'd just told me was something she'd explained before many times and had stopped being surprised by. We get that a lot. 39 miles down the highway, the car went soft in a way that I recognized before I consciously identified it. The steering lost its precision. The pull was there. I moved to the shoulder. I got out and walked around to the rear of the car. Left rear tire, completely flat. The Kansas shoulder of I-70 at midnight is the kind of place that makes you want to be anywhere else. No lights for miles in either direction. Nothing but flat black ground and the occasional semi going by fast enough to push air into you. I had a spare and I knew how to use it. I got the jack out, got the flat off, was working on getting the spare aligned when headlights appeared on the shoulder behind me, moving slowly. A truck, older model, no license plate visible from my angle. It stopped about 20 feet behind my car. The driver got out, late 40s, maybe 50, big across the shoulders. He walked toward me with no hesitation in his step, like he'd arrived at a place he was supposed to be. He said, "My friend said you'd be here." I went very still. He said, "They told me which direction you were coming from." I left the spare on the ground and walked into the field beside the highway. I didn't run. I walked at the pace you use when you don't want to trigger anything, when you need to create distance without showing that you need to create distance. The grass was up to my knees. I kept going until the headlights from both vehicles didn't reach me. I had my phone in my jacket pocket. I called 911. He didn't follow me into the field. He walked to my car and sat on the trunk, like he had nowhere he needed to be, like he expected someone to come to him eventually. Police came in 12 minutes. He was arrested. He had a prior record. The officer who took my statement confirmed that much, and nothing else. I described them to an investigator who called 2 days later. She told me the station's security footage showed my car at Pump 1 during the time I was there. One other vehicle was in the lot, parked away from the pumps, but the pump island beside mine, during the 5 minutes I stood there filling my tank, showed no other vehicles and no other people. The lot was empty on that side. The man in the truck had received a phone call. That part was confirmed. It directed him to that stretch of I-70, described my car, and told him which direction I was coming from. The call came from a number that didn't trace to any registered line. No calls were made from any phone connected to the gas station during my visit. The station didn't have any active landline in service that night. I've gone back through every part of this looking for the thing I missed. The coincidence I'm stitching into a pattern. I do this for a living, finding the rational shape inside a complicated situation, the explanation that fits the evidence. 2 years later, I'm still at the pump island in my head, watching a woman in a blazer tell me something she couldn't have known, in a tone that said she'd been telling people things like this for a long time. The thing that gets me is the tire. I can construct explanations for the rest of it. The sister, the good morning, even the couple that wasn't on the footage. Memory is imperfect. Perception at 11 p.m. on a long highway drive is imperfect. I can make arguments. I cannot make an argument for the tire. The tire went flat at exactly the mile she said it would. She knew before I left the gas station, before I'd driven a single foot of that road, that my left rear tire was going to fail at a specific point on I-70. The only explanation for that is one I don't have a word for. And I'm still in the field next to I-70, waiting for my phone to connect, watching a man sit quietly on the trunk of my car like he'd been told exactly where to be. The attendant asked to see my ID when I bought a bottle of water. Not a beer, not cigarettes, not anything with an age restriction. A bottle of spring water at 3 in the morning. I'm 27. I'm a photographer. Weddings, portraits, some commercial work. This was after a wedding job in a small town in the Ozarks, somewhere in the part of the map where Arkansas and Missouri fold into each other and the roads don't all agree with the GPS. I'd shot the ceremony and reception through 11 p.m., loaded my gear into my car, and started the drive home. The route the GPS chose went through about 40 miles of 2-lane state highway before it rejoined anything I recognized as a real road. I'd argued with it for about 30 seconds and then let it win, because I was too tired to map an alternative. I've driven late at night plenty of times for jobs. You get comfortable with it the same way you get comfortable with anything. It stops feeling unusual. Dark highway, empty road, one set of headlights in either direction, the occasional mile marker. Nothing about that drive felt wrong until the station appeared. It showed up on the right side of the highway around 3 in the morning. One of those single pump operations that's more of a building than a business. The kind of place where you can't imagine there being enough traffic to make it worthwhile. But there it is, open, lit from inside. A single pump sitting under a light that was doing its best. I was low on gas. I pulled in. I filled up at the pump and went inside. The interior was what you'd expect. 2 short aisles running front to back, a cooler along the back wall with its hum filling the room, a register at the front near the door, a card table in the corner with a chair that looked like it belonged in someone's kitchen. No music, no TV, just the cooler and the fluorescent lights and the sound of whatever the building was doing when nobody was asking it to do anything. A woman sat behind the register with a paperback open flat on the counter in front of her. She was in her 60s, reading glasses, gray hair pulled back. She looked up when I came in and waited. I went to the cooler and got a bottle of spring water, brought it to the register, set it on the counter. She closed the book with her finger still marking the page, looked at the bottle, then looked at me. "Can I see your ID?" The way she asked it was the thing. Not like she was unsure about my age. I'm 27, and I was dressed in the rumpled business casual you wear to a wedding you're working at. She asked it the way you ask something that has nothing to do with the reason you're supposed to ask it. Routine in form. Something else entirely underneath. I almost laughed. "For water?" She didn't laugh. She held her hand out across the counter. The same gesture a cashier makes when they ask for your payment card. Patient, like she was used to waiting. I took out my wallet. I looked at her face one more time, trying to read it. She gave me nothing. I handed over my driver's license. She looked at it for a moment, not quickly, not cursorily, but in the way you look at something you're actually reading. Then she reached under the register and pulled out a sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook. She wrote something on it with a blue pen. She slid my license back across the counter without a word. "Is this a store policy?" I said. "Store policy," she said. She was reaching for her book. I looked around the store. The walls had the usual things stapled or taped to them. A promotional display for something, a county business permit in a plastic sleeve, a fire exit sign. Nothing about an ID requirement anywhere near the register. Nothing behind the counter that I could see. No sign posted anywhere in the store. "I've never heard of that policy before," I said. She opened the book to her page. "Drive safe," she said. I picked up my water. I started toward the door. I don't know why I looked back. Habit, maybe. I'm a photographer. I look at things on the way out of rooms. I look at what the room is doing when people think the interaction is over. She wasn't writing on the lined paper anymore. She had a different sheet out, longer, more filled. I could see from the door that it had more writing on it, the same blue ink covering most of the page from near the top. She was at the bottom, adding to it. I could see that it was a list, not clearly enough to read any of it. I was standing near the door, maybe 25 feet from the counter, and the light wasn't good enough. But the structure of it was visible. Names, I thought. A column of names written in the same hand. My name at the bottom. Something that looked like 12 or 13 lines above it, each the same approximate length. She didn't look up. She just kept writing. I left. I drove the rest of the way home and got there around 6:30 in the morning. I slept until noon. I woke up to a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to it once, got up, listened to it again. A detective called my studio the following week and explained in more detail. My name had been found on a handwritten list recovered from a gas station in the Ozarks during an unrelated check. She was contacting everyone whose name appeared on the list. She asked if I'd stopped there recently and whether anything unusual had happened during my visit. I told her about the ID. I described the sheet of lined paper, the second sheet, the column of names. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was collecting names. The other 12 people on the list, all of them had stopped at that station alone. At night, all 12 had been reported missing within 10 days of their visit. The cases were spread across several months. They hadn't been connected before the list was found because they were reported through different county systems, and the victims had different home addresses across a wide area. The attendant was not cooperating. She hadn't been charged yet. The question investigators were trying to answer wasn't who she was or what she knew. Those were already being worked. But who she was passing the lists to, through what mechanism, and for how long. The station had no internet connection they could document, no outgoing phone records for the nights in question, no camera. The method of transfer hadn't been identified. The detective said they were certain the list was operational, that names on it had been used in some way, that the pattern of disappearances was too consistent with the visit dates to be coincidental. She said, "You left before whatever it was. We don't know what it was, but we know it was supposed to happen after." I've turned that over many times in the months since. I'm a photographer. I'm used to thinking about timing, about the fraction of a second that determines whether you have the shot or you don't, whether the light is right or the moment has passed. I left before whatever it was. Every person above my name on that list didn't. I don't know what the woman in the Ozarks was writing in her paperback that night when I walked out. I don't know if she watched me leave or kept her eyes on the page. I don't know what she believed was going to happen to me before morning, or who she expected to call her when it did. I know I still fill up before I get on a late-night route now. I know I stay on the main highways. I know that when I drive through rural areas after dark, I look at every lit-up building I pass, and I think about what's happening inside it that I can't see from the road. And I know that somewhere in the Ozarks there is a sheet of lined notebook paper with 13 names on it, and 12 of those people are gone, and one of them is me. And the only difference between me and the 12 above me is that I turned around at the door and looked at something I wasn't supposed to see. I don't know what I would have done if I'd known what I was looking at. I'd like to think I would have done something useful, but I left, and I'm still here. And on certain late-night drives, that's not entirely a comfort. If you keep thinking about the attendant, ringing up every customer normally for 3 hours while someone watched from behind that door, and the fact that she never gave up a single name except the one who listened. Smash that like button, subscribe so you never miss a story, and drop in the comments which of these 5 stops you'd have gotten wrong. Would you have taken the left exit? Would you have looked back at the register on your way out? A gas station is the last light on the road. After that, it's just you and the highway. Click now to watch 4 disturbing road trip horror stories. Some of those highways have things on them that don't show up in the headlights. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.